Okay, so welcome everyone, and thank you for clicking into our grazing webinar on grazing utilisation. I'm going to be joined this morning by Tomas Tubritt, research technologist on pasture breeding and working with Vista Milk in Moorepark, and dairy farmer Peter Hynes. Look, I suppose we've left the content of this pretty concentrated on the grazing utilisation trait that's gone into the Pasture Profit Index this year. So we've left plenty of time for questions and answers, so you can do that via the Q&A function on the bottom of your screen. The other thing that will come up in the chat shortly is that we have a survey running, and that will run for the next 2 weeks with a prize of 10 bags of diamond grass seed for anyone that enters the survey. And then finally, we have some polls that will come up during the course of the webinar. And look, we appreciate the input and your viewpoints on that. Just to encourage the discussion. So look, I suppose I'll jump straight into introducing Tomas Tubritt, who's done a lot of the research work that went into the new Teagasc Grazing Utilisation Index that is added to the PPI this year. So good morning, Tomas.
Good morning, Pat. How are you? And good morning, everyone.
So look, I suppose to dive straight into it, I suppose we've seen this year that there's a new index or star ratings on each variety on the Pasture Profit Index this year, or the recommended list. So what exactly is this meaning for farmers? Like, I suppose there's already been a number of sub-indices on the PPI now. And what does this new trait add to the picture for farmers?
Yeah, so it's the utilization star index, and it's essentially we've measured the grazing efficiency of every variety. So it's how well these varieties can be grazed. So this is really the culmination of 6 years work, which began with the on-farm variety evaluation study. So that's been running for the last 8 years, where we have over 100 farms on this trial, and we saw monocultures of varieties into single paddocks. So it could be a 10-acre paddock there, and just one variety in that field, and we examined the performance of that. We were looking at yield and stuff like that. And what feedback we were getting back from farmers was that certain varieties were hard to graze. The cows just went into them, they sulked, they walked the wires, they didn't stick their head down and graze, they just moan and bawl. And this kind of led us on to doing some plot work here in Teagasc Moorepark. So we've ran maybe 4 different sowing years of trials where we've essentially sown these plots in large plot trials. We get them grazed by cows, and we take post-grazing sward height measurements off those to kind of get an indication of what varieties are better grazed than others.
So you're telling me that this new measure is measured by cows rather than, I suppose, my understanding would have been like the other traits on the index, spring, summer, autumn, silage quality and persistency. They were measured from the cutting trials that are run on the 5 sites across the country by the Department of Agriculture. So you're saying this is sort of a new, I suppose, another separate trial, another round of plans that are
another protocol, essentially, Pat, is what it is. Yeah. So like you were saying, the existing traits within the PPI are done on cutting trials by the Department of Agriculture. A couple of those, they have different locations across the country. The quality itself is done off specific cuts within those, and the silage was also done in a different protocol, but is also done with a Haldrup mower. So this is the first trait introduced to the PPI that is evaluated by animals, and we're catching the animal-plant interaction within these trials.
Like there would have been, I suppose, up until now we would use other traits on the index, like, maybe the less dense varieties or the varieties with maybe better quality would have been the ones that would graze up better, or more palatable, or cows would perform better on. Like, what does this new trial add to that then?
Yeah, so the previous plot work was conducted by Dr. Nicky Byrne in Teagasc Grange, and so he grazed the plot, but also prior to that, he took measurements on each plot and then related them back to grazing. So he saw what did these varieties have before grazing that made them more grazing. And what he found that was tetraploids were better grazed than diploids, and he found that if you had higher levels of digestibility in these varieties, that they were better grazed. Then I conducted subsequent evaluations, and I found very similar results to Nikki, that higher quality within these varieties was leading to higher grazing efficiency of those varieties. And I also found that we know that tetraploids are that bit higher in digestibility, so that likely explained why they're better grazable. But what we also found is that digestibility was only explaining perhaps half of the variation between the varieties for this grazing trait. So you could take.
To explain that a bit better, what does that mean? That, like, when you say it's half the variation, you know?
So it kind of means that if you have two varieties that were both the same digestibility, it didn't mean that they were grazed out the same. So that
it's only half the picture, effectively. It's only
exactly, it's showing half the picture. And then looking at the other traits we measured, we found that higher tiller densities kind of went against grazing, because that was likely to lead, it acts as a barrier for the cows to actually graze deeper into the sward with their tongues, and they can't actually grasp the grass with their tongues, and it makes it that more difficult to graze out. And we know that diploids are more denser, they have higher tiller densities, and that is likely leading to them being less well grazed.
And how much of the picture does that density tell you then? What kind of a, like, it isn't all the dense varieties that are poor?
No, it isn't. So the density was explaining at an R squared of 40%, but then when we combined quality and density, or quality and density and stuff like that together, we found that we could predict how well a variety we graze using its quality and using its density. We could predict it as accurate as 75%. Okay. So by combining the two measures. And
still doesn't, I suppose, what the advantage of this new trait is that it's actually, the cows are telling you from the.
Exactly, it's directly measured. We're not trying to indirectly measure by measuring other traits, where the cows, like you're saying, are actually doing the measurement for us. And
well, it seems that from my following of this over the years, it's a very complex trait that's probably very hard to predict, like, isn't it?
There is, and there's more stuff we need to investigate. We need to start maybe looking into the lower stratas of the sward. Are varieties differing there? If we're taking quality just before grazing, do they differ in quality lower down in the sward, or can we maybe find differences between varieties?
Even within tetraploid, like, the common one is, look, if you want a sward to graze out better, just sow 100% tetraploid, or up your proportion of tetraploid. Like, is that that's guaranteed to work, like?
No, because even within the grazing utilization list that we have, we can still see that some tetraploids aren't performing as well. It's just, as a whole, you would expect that a tetraploid would be better than a diploid. And at the moment, our market is generally split between equal proportions of diploids and tetraploids sown within swards. So our recommendation is, if you are comfortable upping your proportion of tetraploids, you are likely to see better grazing advantages. But as you say, within the tetraploid group themselves, there is still a wide variation between varieties.
That's perfect. Look, what I'm going to do now is launch the first poll, just to get a gauge of what's happening out there on farm for anyone. Look, I know everyone on here isn't farming, and some are, but look, I suppose people have a gauge of what's happening out there. So we'll launch the first poll, and it's pretty simple. Is it up yet, Robert? Yeah, it's up there now. So look, what I'm trying to say is, look, what percentage of your grazing platform, or grazing platforms you're aware of, are either, pre-mowed, come the next 4 weeks, if it ever warms up, or it has warmed up now, but if we get a good supply of grass back, what proportion of farmers or of the platform is being pre-mowed, topped, or has to be cleaned up with bales that you're trying to cut every. Basically, you're running a mechanical blade over what proportion of ground each year. And while that's up, I'll jump over to Peter. Peter, grazing utilization.
Can I just say, Pat, when I read your poll and topping mentioned in it, the fear I would have is.
See, Peter, that's why I launched the poll before I let you speak, because I thought if people would be afraid to answer it if I left you speak first.
If a farmer votes for topping, is there an automatic eject button?
No. There's just look. I suppose I'll jump into more of it. Yes, because and And look, sure, Peter, you can shout out. Don't, Peter, people are on here as our guests. You're not to offend them. You know, look, there's lots of reasons, and we'll get into them why maybe fields are being, look, they're surplus and they're stocking rate. You know, there's variety, there's a whole host of different things, and look, everyone's at a different stage, so it isn't, we're not here to judge anyone. But you know, look, I suppose there's a measure of, I suppose it's still better than look, Peter, what you say to that? Look, I suppose just 25% are saying less than, or 36% or respondents said to be less than 25%. So that's actually quite good. That's, you know, basically they're not, so they're not doing, they're actually able to graze out quite well. You have 40%, which is between 25 and 50%. And then you still have 21% between 50 and 75%, and we have 2% up at 100%. So look, I suppose it's pretty good up there. Like, and like, I suppose, you know, management has a lot to do with this, and I suppose we're out managing problematic paddocks to a degree. Like, what would you say on that, Peter?
Yeah, and I mean, like, look, you know, I'd be a huge fan of tetraploids, and listening to Tomas speaking there, and the understanding of maybe being brave enough to increase the amount of tetraploids in a paddock. As a dairy farmer, I'm nearly happier at 100% tetraploids. Yes, we do have a dry farm, but we also have wet ground, and it's noticeable how easier it is to manage them, how easier it is to graze them out. But likewise, I would see a lot of difference in different tetraploids and in how we manage them on farm, and how we sit those paddocks within our grazing rotation.
Like, I suppose it's effectively
I could graze any tetraploid out to 4 centimeters, but it's a case of what cover do I go in to get my 4 centimeters, and that's the key thing for me. I think even looking at weather patterns in the last couple of years, I mean, like, we surely haven't forgotten about the drought we had, but likewise, this spring has been cold, and April has been cold, and then it got very dry, and you'd be just kind of maybe worried with the way weather patterns are going, that do we need to learn a certain set of skills as farmers to maybe not be as concerned to get in at kind of 1,300-1,400 into paddocks, and maybe having to run our farm cover at certain times of the year slightly higher to. But I know it has an impact on regrowth, but at the same time, if I can see.
But does that clash with certain varieties then? Like, you know, you're saying there's certain paddocks on the farm where, you know, you walk past it this morning, you're going to have to go in there tonight, because if you wait till the weekend, it's going to be gone too far, too strong to graze. Like, you know, does that?
Even depending on growth rates, Pat, I mean, at the moment, we'd be hoping to hit 50 to 60 a day this week. But likewise, we've seen the farm where it's growing 120 to 150 a day, and I suppose it can be nearly harder to manage when you high growth rates from the perspective. You know, every paddock needs to be grazed as fast as possible when you have extremely high growth rates, and there are tetraploids there that we would have on farm that I know I have to get in at 1,300 or 1,400. I can't sit till I cover 1,600 there, because I just know I won't get a residual. Which, okay, look, I'll go in and graze it now, but I'm not. Where am I going to be in 18 days time on it? I'm going to have poor quality grass ahead of the cows. Likewise, we've paddocks there that I could comfortably go into at 1,800 or 1,900. And while I'm no stranger to mowing 1,500 and 1,600 covers, it can be a little bit soul destroying when you're driving around mowing a cover of 1,500, just because you know you're not going to get a residual on it.
Yeah.
And the contractor comes in and makes 3 or 4 bales for you. So it's, you know, you still have to put on the bale handler, and you have to put on the mower.
It's almost like you feel that maybe the cover must be higher than what you're thinking. The fact that the cows won't graze it out, like, you know, that you think that.
I think it's when you look down into the sward, and likewise, what Tomas was saying about, you know, seeing cows walking a fence and not being content in a paddock. Like, just to put it in context, we've one paddock, and it's split with a diploid on one side and a tetraploid diploid mix on the other half of the paddock. And the general rule of thumb would be that the cows would have to go in, the easiest for the cows is to go in the gap on the side where the diploid is. But unless I actually split the paddock in two and force them to graze the diploid first, they're not going to, they'll just walk straight over it and head to the other side, head to the two-way mix, and they'll graze that. But likewise, we've the same with tetraploids. We've a 6-acre paddock with 2 tetraploids, and I know for a fact one is a lot easier to graze out than the other, and I purposely put it further away from the gap, and I would comfortably have to pre-mow or bale one side, the near side of the paddock, because it's a tetraploid that the cows just aren't as happy on. And
I suppose what way do you see it working now with this new the new index on the PPI, or where varieties are now ranked on their ability to be grazed well or not? Like, you know, does that make it a bit easier for you? Where I suppose now, up until now, I suppose you've tried different varieties and you've got different results, but
I think it's a huge step forward for all of us as farmers, because you know, I think the key thing is here that the amount of work that Teagasc have put into getting those figures and having it from actual cows grazing out paddocks. From the simple perspective, like, do we all really know what 4 centimeters is? Like, 4 centimeters is literally grazed out to the board, where I'll hold my hand up and I'll put cows into a paddock and get them to graze it out, and it could be a cover of 15 or 1600, and I'd be happy that they grazed it out. Which I can guarantee you, if the lads came down from Moorepark, I'd probably be a centimetre off of a residual on it. And when you get 3 or 4 grazings in a row like that, you're going to get a lot of poor quality building up at the bottom of the sward. So I think it's having access to that information, because let's be clear, like, you know, reseeding isn't a cheap investment. It's probably one of the best investments we can do on farm. But in my opinion, there's absolutely zero room for cutting corners on the process. And you know, you can save a small bit of money on grass seed, but you're not saving a whole pile of money on the reseeding. So having access to information where you're getting good graze outs on swards is going to be key for any of us going forward, because I'd certainly be a lot comfortable hitting a 4 centimetre residual on my grazing platform with my cows than having to run around baling up the place. You know, there's plenty of other parts of the farm that I can get silage bales off of, and maybe make more efficient use of my time by maybe letting a cover at the far end of the grazing platform, keeping cows closer to the yard, and letting a cover run on to 2,500 and getting a reasonably good crop of bales off it.
Yeah, you've hit a point there, and it'll lead me nicely to launch the second poll, please, Robert. You know, look, and I suppose it's, do you think, I suppose you talked about this build up of material, you know, if you're not grazing it out and you've this build up. So like the poll is, do you think the animal performance on your farm is reduced by the build up of poor quality material in your swards, and or forcing cows to have to graze it out, you know, leave them in there for an extra few hours? You know, you have 2 choices. If the material is there after you, you know, it's going to be there the next time. But if you force the cows, it's obviously going to probably pinch them that evening as well. Like, so do you have the second poll there, please, Robert? Go on.
I think it's a very relevant poll anyway, Pat, because
have a go at that. Yeah, and I'll bring back to Tomas again, like from a research perspective, you know, or from a grass perspective, even what's actually happening, you know, when there's grass left there, you know, and like as Peter was saying, you've 3 or 4 rounds of this, like where, you know, it's maybe, look, we're getting a good graze out now at the moment because it was cold and we're probably going to lower covers. But, you know, over the summer now, grass will build up again, and, you know, you're over the heating period now in the next, in through the start of June, you know, there'll be a bit of this kind of butt coming into the sward. Like, what's actually happening there, or what would you say is?
Yeah, so like what Peter was saying is Teagasc have these high standards of hitting tight residuals, but it's not like there's a reason behind it. And the reason is that the tighter you graze, if you graze tight, you're not going to be left with any residual leaf left on the plant. You'll have a bit of stem, that'll be it. And that stimulates the grass plant to actually produce more leaves, because the plant needs to produce leaves to capture the light, and then that's going to fund growth for what the plant needs to do. But if you have remaining leaves on the plant post-grazing, they're older leaves, they're less photosynthetically active, number one, so you could get reduced growth rates. But also over time, those leaves are going to build up in lignin and indigestible material, and that then lowers the overall digestibility of the sward. So quite simply, by grazing tight, we're going to increase the proportion of leaf that's produced. And if you can increase the proportion of leaf within your sward by 5%, that's equivalent to a 1% increase in digestibility in that sward. And then with that 1% increase in digestibility, studies have shown that animals are going to increase their intake by about 0.2 kilograms of grass. And then that 1.2 increase in intake is going to give you an extra 1/4 kg in milk just from buying. So by doing that tight grazing, increasing the leaf, thereby increasing the digestibility, you're going to increase the milk in your tank. And I suppose
it's what the key thing here is, you know, if you're forcing cows more, it's probably going to pinch. You know, if you have to force cows to graze out, I suppose you're always going to put cows under a certain amount of pressure, I suppose, because, you know, if you'd always let them into a fresh paddock every day, then after 3 weeks you'd have nowhere to go. But
exactly, yeah.
But the poll is pretty evident there. Like, you know, that we got a pretty straight answer there that, you know, 83% of people said that, look, you know, trying to manage the grass either way, you know, you don't pinch them in this round, but the stuff will be there in the way the next time, and or you now, like, to know that.
Yeah, and I think just sorry to cut in there now, Pat, but I think, John, listen to what Tomas is saying there again, you can relate that to a whole different discussion at the moment as we come to breeding season. There's a huge discussion over increasing production. You know, and I think what we as dairy farmers need to remember is that it's about marrying genetics versus what we're offering at the kitchen table every day to the cow, and trying to work the two. And I think, you know, as you kind of hit, like, it's very easy to hit a residual first round. It's a dream to do it at the moment in second round, because unfortunately it's too bloody dry. But as you head into the third round, and a lot of us would be kind of thereabouts at the moment, and further into the fourth round, it's about presenting quality and the best quality you can to a cow that's at peak lactation. Because the minute I start pinning them back on a strip wire and forcing them to graze out a paddock, or maybe splitting the herd and putting 30 cows into a paddock to try and shave out a residual and moving the rest of the herd on, I'm chipping away at my peak production the whole time. And unfortunately, once cows decide that the hardest day's work of the year is over, there's only one way they're going to go, and it's about maintaining peak lactation for as long as you can, in good growth conditions.
I'll stop you there, Peter, because there's actually a kind of a relevant question after coming in there on the Q&A. So if anyone wants to ask any questions, you can type them into the Q&A at the bottom of the screen. So the question was the quality trait on the PPI. So I suppose one of the traits that's been on the Pasture Profit Index or recommended list from the beginning, or for a good number of years, is the quality trait. So the quality trait on the PPI index, is quality determined by leaf to stem ratio of the sward, or is quality seen as something else? So I suppose it probably, we could probably be here for the rest of the day talking about, because of everything that we've said about having quality swords, but there's also a quality index that's separate to the Grazing Utilisation Index on the PPI. So do you want to just run through quickly, Tomas, what is quality on the PPI recorded from?
Yeah, so quality is recorded by the Department of Agriculture in the mid-season. So the department will take cuts from April, May, June, July, and August. There'll be 6 cuts in all, and these cuts are, done for dry matters, and then they're sent off to a lab to be analysed for quality. And this quality is dry matter digestibility. So essentially, that is a measure of the feed you feed the animals, how much is going to be used towards production, and how much is actually going to be shat out by the cow, and not actually, it's just going to end up back in your paddock and be recycled. So it's a measure how much energy is essentially in each grass. And in relation to the question there, is it determined by leaf to stem ratio? It's the digestibility will be influenced by that ratio. If you have higher amounts of leaf relative to true stem, because pseudo stem makes up part of the stem of the plant, but that is digestible, whereas it's this hard stem, this lignin that is produced, that is the stuff that is indigestible and will lower the digestibility.
And then talk a bit more what's actually, how that compares, I suppose, when the department are cutting their plots to 4 centimetres each time. So there's no, I suppose, that build up of material that Peter talked about. That's not actually a factor in the quality.
No, it's not. So you could argue that's a pro in the fact that all varieties are kept the same. So it's accurate in that varieties, if our system is to cut them or graze them to 4 centimetres, this is the regrowth, that is the digestibility of it. I suppose with the line of my work, would it not be more accurate to have an animal, say if a variety can never be grazed down to that level, it's very difficult to graze it down to 5 centimetres, and then that's going to build up with less digestibility. Should that not be reflected in the PPI? It's kind of, you're either disadvantaging some varieties or you're, but I think...
Am I being too confusing now to say that, if someone wants to look at the Pasture Profit Index now, that if they wanted a measure of quality that they would be getting from the varieties in the mixture, that they would probably need to take quality and the graze out into account to get, a sward that they could actually, I suppose, the quality is the genetic potential of the variety to have quality, whereas it not necessarily have that quality if it isn't being grazed out.
Yes, that's a very good analogy, Pat. Yeah, that's what it could do, but will it actually be able to be grazed out to hit that quality? The Grazing Utilisation Index will give you a better indication of that.
There's another question there from Joe Lawler, looking at the utilization trait. And again, I suppose, look, this is the crux of this grazing utilization trait as to how it's going to affect quality, how it's going to affect the quality of the feed available to the cow, because effectively that's what drives production. Having the quantity and quality of grass that you can get into the animal in the highest proportion or the highest quantity possible, because it's with quality and quantity into the animal is going to drive production. So looking at the utilization trait on the PPI, diploids getting 4 stars, and that goes against what's being said about high D is greater than better grazing and tiller density leads to poor grazing. So look, I suppose we kind of went through some of that, Tomas, but it's a valid point that's probably worth going over again. So I suppose starting with the diploids, I suppose we would have always said that, and Peter alluded to that you wouldn't have expected the diploids to get 4 stars for grazing.
Yeah, exactly. But it's like we were also saying as well, like not all tetraploids are all guaranteed to be well grazed out. Like some of them are. So I suppose when we say that we expect tetraploids to be better grazed out. If we look at the star rating, you'll find that tetraploids are more concentrated to a higher rating than a diploid, and there might be a bit of mixing within the middle of those. And there are certain diploids that we have found that are getting 4 stars for grazing. they might be closer to a 3-star because there's only maybe €1 difference between what classifies a 4-star to a 3-star. And we're also, like, these varieties are going to be evaluated in the coming years as well. So we will be getting more data feeding into the PPI, and that's going to, you know, it might lead to a small bit of re-ranking, but I imagine a 4-star variety will remain no less than a 3. And we could also see some of the tetraploids that are 3-star equally go back up to being a 4-star. If they're on that limit to what between a 3-star and a 4-star, it's likely that they could increase or decrease, but they won't increase or decrease by much.
I suppose it's, look, I don't want to burden on over this again, but like this, you know, like I suppose that's what was said up until now, that, you know, better digestibility, which is the measure from the department's cutting trials, should equal better graze out. Like, but like I know you've said already, maybe people weren't in at the very start, but like the digestibility of sward is probably exactly half the picture. So it's half the reason that a variety is grazed or not grazed.
Yeah. That's it. And the other bit is, like we said, more open space in the sward tends to leave the better graze out. And also, like, certain varieties, depending on their genetic background, they might be more inclined to be, they might just more genetically inclined to produce more stem relative to another variety, and that could just lead to poorer graze out in mid-season. So just because a variety has higher digestibility, it's likely to have better graze out, but it doesn't guarantee it.
On the animal performance, Peter, like, would you see differences? Is it basically, could you tell, you know, if a sward is clean, you know it's clean, like there isn't a lot of stem and dead material at the base of the sward, like I suppose if it's hard when you're jumping from variety to variety, like, and you've lots of things on the farm, it's probably hard, you know, they get 3 grazings in one and 2 in the other, you know, it mightn't be till they're in the next paddock that they're actually milking off the last one. So
I suppose, look, it's hard to really pin down individualized varieties on a grazing platform, and we have such a diverse grazing platform. But I suppose what would be noticeable is not so much a change in performance of animal, but more you know, I suppose essentially boiling down to the residual you're hitting and the quality. Mm-hmm. You know, are you leaving poor quality grass after you, which is ultimately going to.
But I think, you know, at home, it's like if you get a good graze out, that's milk in the tank in 3 weeks' time. Like, you know, that's.
You know, and I suppose it really comes back down to management, and like, yeah, ultimately what you said there, like about keeping the cows performing in 18 to 20 days time, by ensuring you get to where you want it today inside the paddock. But likewise, you know, maybe I suppose to an extent, you know, knowing that if you graze out the paddock cleanly, that's you know, you can go, that you can keep your rotation at a certain length where, you know, if you're leaving a bit after you have a poor quality variety inside that you know, kind of leaving the paddock with the cows, there's a management decision to be made to get back in there at 1200 and maybe try and work to that, back down to that residual with the cows by maybe balancing, you know, a bit of quality regrowth with what you left behind from the last time, and maybe that's nearly on par with, you know, having a really clean graze out to 4 centimeters, going back in there 18 days later, and then but also having straw on the feed rail, and you're kind of thinking, why in God's name am I feeding straw? But you're probably feeding, you know, on a poor quality graze out 20 days later, you're actually feeding straw at the bottom of that sward. So it's
yeah. Look, there's one more question there on quality, and then I'm going to jump on to mixture work that you did, Tomas, then afterwards, just to, I suppose, Look, most of the grass seed is going out as mixture, so it's probably relevant in to see can you combine traits. But there's one question from Ger Courtney on the quality. Is the quality trait I assume in the Pasture Profit Index standardized for certain nitrogen levels? Some argue that if using less mid-season nitrogen, will quality be impacted? So I assume that must mean like if grass comes under stress because it is being grown at less nitrogen, like are you compromising quality then?
Yeah, so they are. So all the varieties are sown at a standard nitrogen level in the department trials, which is I think it's 250 kilograms of nitrogen, if not higher. So you could argue that, and then maybe that's a trait that we could be looking at towards in the future, where are certain varieties more nitrogen use efficient, and do they maintain their digestibility better at lower levels of nitrogen? I suppose if we're talking about a 20% reduction in nitrogen, so that's going to bring us back to maybe 200 kilograms of nitrogen, I probably wouldn't see mid-season quality being as impacted, because we'll be going back a couple of units, maybe instead of maybe a unit per day based on our rotation going back to 0.8 of a unit. I don't think that will have as drastic effect on mid-season quality. It's probably more like you say, Pat, weather could have a far more greater effect on it. If we come into a drought and things get more strawy and under stress, that's likely to have a greater effect on.
Would you expect like the ranking that you have? I suppose you've effectively ranked on the grazing trait. You've ranked from best to worst. Would you expect that like the better ones would do better in a stressed period, like in a period of?
Yeah. I don't know about that, Pat, because being honest, from nitrogen point of view, we haven't measured it, and I'm not aware of any trials that have done it where they found any re-ranking good grazing because of grazing or digestion because of nitrogen levels. I can say that some of these plots were evaluated in 2018 during the drought, and even from a yield point of view, obviously there was a 3-ton difference in annual tonnage between 2017 and 2018, but it was actually very interesting to see that the varieties still maintained a pretty good correlation between 17 and 18. So there was not as much re-ranking based on the drought as we might have expected. So we could kind of confer from that these perennial ryegrass varieties that we are using, none of them are more drought efficient than the others. And based on that logic, we can't say for certain that they're as nitrogen use efficient as the others, but it's definitely something that we are planning on looking into the future.
That's perfect. And look, while you're on the I suppose I should mention clover quickly. While you're talking about nitrogen mid-season, I suppose if nitrogen has been spared in mid-season, like I suppose clover has a big opportunity there. Like, is there clover in the grazing plots here, or would you expect that they would influence the graze out in itself?
Yeah, so there's no clover in the grazing plots. They're just straight perennial ryegrass varieties sown on their own. So there was work down in Clonakilty where they have sown single monocultures of varieties with and without clover, and like the plot work we found here, they only had 8 varieties. 4 were tetraploids, 4 were diploids. The tetraploids as a group did tend to be better grazed out than the diploids. And then what they also found is then that when you added clover into those swards, that the grazing advantage was removed. Now, there's a couple of caveats to have with that. There was only 8 varieties examined and stuff like that. But I suppose at the moment within the PPI, we need to get more successful at reseeding clover. And if we can manage that, then maybe, and if we can manage getting clover into swards at a high enough level of about 25%, well, then maybe we don't have to worry about grazing out of swards as much, or different varieties grazing out. But I think until we do find that,
tell me on mixtures. Like, I suppose most of what goes out is mixtures. Look, I suppose a lot of what's going into intensive grazing ground is moving to around the 50% tetraploid. So like I had Aston Energy, which is the 5 stars for grazing, but look, it isn't one of the higher yielding, to be straight. Like if I wanted to complement that in and put something like Moorepark that is, you know, high density and better yield parameters, like what would you expect to happen then? Like, you know, what am I giving? What am I getting? Like, you know?
Yeah, so we conducted trials to investigate exactly this, Pat. So what we did was we sowed varieties as monocultures. We sowed varieties in two-way mixes, so that's binary mixes. We sowed varieties in tertiary mixes, so that's, you know, a third, and a third, and that we had equal proportions of diploids and tetraploids in that, which that would have led us to swards with maybe 66% tetraploids and 33% diploids, or vice versa. And then we also sowed a 4 variety mix. So we had 4 varieties sown in as themselves, within binary mixtures with all the other varieties, within 3-way mixes with all the other varieties, and the 4-way mixes. And what we found is there was nothing revolutionary. We found that by using this, we can predict the sward of the mixtures. So we had our monoculture performance, 2 monocultures, and one was yielding 13 ton and the other variety was yielding 14 ton. When we mixed those in a 2-way mixture, we found a yield of 13.5 ton. And that's not really surprising, but it was repeatable for all plots that we found. There's very few outliers, and repeatable for all traits as well. So we also conducted this for the digestibility trait, and you found that if you had a high digestibility variety and a low digestibility variety, you get it right in the middle. And then, like I said, for if we had a tetraploid dominant sward with 66% tetraploid in it, we found that it did have higher grazing efficiency. We found it had higher quality, and we found that based on the yield
but
potential.
say on like both based on if it was on totally on yield, you just picked the highest yielding variety and so that, like, but like if you were to bring in some of the grazing traits into a mixture, then like is basically the grazing efficiency going to be mean of the parts? Like, you know, if you've got a Moorepark, to be fair, has lots of those yield parameters, but it's 3 stars for grazing. As a diploid, I probably think that's pretty acceptable, because a lot of diploids aren't up there, especially the denser ones. But like if I wanted to bump up that sward in to maybe be a bit better on grazing, like, you know, what would be the expected results like of the mixture then?
Yeah, so like you said, Pat, if you mix that with Aston Energy being a 5-star grazer and Moorepark being a 3-star grazer, you can predict it's going to perform as a 4-star. So that is pretty good. And then you're getting better spring growth then, which is probably where Aston Energy maybe falls down a bit. So then, but what you could essentially do, Pat, is take each of the individual sub-index values, sum them up and get the average, and that's going to be your average sward performance, and it is as predictable as that. Yeah. So
Peter, what do you think about mixtures? Like you talked about 100% tetraploid, but we've got some farmers come back to us and they would say that, look, I can still put 40 or 50% diploid into the mixture. It still grazes out very well, but I find advantages in having that bit more ground cover, either in the shoulders of the ear or maybe just general more protection of the soil. Like,
for me, Pat, I think it boils down to what type of ground am I grazing, and essentially our farmers kind of, well, it's one block with 70 acres split by the road, and then the main block of land is either very good limestone ground and extremely dry to graze, with 70 acres which is reclaimed and susceptible to flooding. So it's old humped and hollowed ground, so it's still humped and hollowed. And I think when you put up your first poll about removing surplus bales or pre-mowing, I would first off I would have hit 100% and said, look, we're gonna, everything gets mowed at some stage during the year. And when I actually sat back and thought about it, and I thought, well, actually, being honest, I don't, from the simple fact we just can't really mow the humped and hollowed ground. It's not.
Yeah, it's a critical point that I have omitted to date, is that, you know, when picking mixtures, I suppose if there is ground there that can't be mowed for whatever reason, you know.
And I think where I'm getting to with this, Pat, is that there's 30 acres of that ground is the your high digestibility mix,
which is Aston Energy, Meduno, Moorepark, Aston King,
and it's ground that we don't mow, but we don't necessarily need to mow. Look, I'd be totally honest with you. There would be a small little bit of a difference in quality late in the grazing season versus 100% tetraploid sward that I pre-mowed or baled at some stage during the season, but it's I'd be still very, very happy with the quality, and I wouldn't be going down there with more because there's no need to. But it's probably somewhere. That's where I see mixes fitting into our farm is on land like that. There's
it's interesting because of the amount of mixtures that we put out, and
also I need the quality from the point of view that I can't mow it, and likewise, I suppose just going back to your point with clover, like we have clover and that, and we did chase a lot of 50-50 tetraploid mixes on the farm ourselves, predominantly when we were reseeding ground that we wanted for silage too, and I think that's probably my key focus now is getting back and getting more clover into the main grazing platform, and ultimately everything that we reseed on the farm is reseeded from a grazing perspective. If you can't graze it, I wouldn't be setting mixes specifically for silage. Everything, 100% of the farm has to be available for grazing, but likewise, I do feel with fields that we were taking 2 cuts of silage off every year that we were struggling a bit with clover in those swaths, but definitely getting back to the main grazing platform. I think it's a number of tetraploids with good spring and summer grazing with clover built into them, and then a proportion of the farm will have a mix with a percentage of diploid put into it, just to maybe give us a little bit of a firmer footing in the springtime and stuff.
It's interesting because maybe 3 years ago we would have seen a swing towards people trying 100% tetraploid, but we see kind of a move back toward people putting in 20, 30, 40, 50% again, that they don't see the challenge of graze out as such with that 50%, half and half type mixture. So I suppose it probably reflects what you're seeing in that heavier ground that you can mow.
Yeah, and look, I think everyone has a different kind of a different preference to what they what sort of a mix they set on farm, whether they're 100% tetraploid or whether they're getting an off-the-shelf mix. But I think at the same time, if you're getting an off-the-shelf mix, the fact that the grass seed company has access to that information on the PPI about graze outs means that if you're buying a mix, for God's sake, just don't pick a bag off the shelf. Look at what the grass seed company are selling to you, and if they're selling you a grazing mix, they're certainly going to have their eye on graze out traits anyway.
Should have, Peter. Look, I made some promises that I would wrap this up without extending our way, into the afternoon too much. So look, I think we've pretty much covered the graze out pretty well, and thanks to Peter and Tomas for discussing it out in good detail. Look, I suppose for us it's an important trait because of we want to achieve high farmer satisfaction, and there's probably nothing more dissatisfying than having cows bawling because they can't graze something out. So for us, this takes, this makes it a lot more black and white. There's a trait on the PPI that gives people an impression whether it is a field that they can't graze, or they're generally having a problem with graze out, that they, I suppose, have a tool now that can target the varieties that are slightly easier to graze out. So thank you for that. I suppose the final point I'll mention is that there's still the survey is run. It's in the chat function at the bottom of the screen if you want the link, and we'll have it up a few more places over the next week or so. And look, it's just an opportunity for us. We're interested to see, to get some feedback from yourselves on basically what's happening out there, and basically how we can help throughout the year, what more information or what other type of information that you think are relevant that we can work towards for the rest of the year. And look, there is that prize of 10 bags grass seed, of diamond grass seeds for your time in filling that out. For one person will draw out of a hat. So other than that, thanks to everyone that's attended. And look, it's great to see there's a good attendance again for this webinar. And look, we'll see you again soon. So thank you.
Thanks for having us, Pat.